Religious freedom has been hanging in the balance, specifically with regard to an important case that the Supreme Court has recently come down on dealing with a baker. We're going to talk about that in the second half of the show. But the first half of the show, I want to address a very serious situation that has taken place. And we hear about these more and more about social workers wrongfully taking children from families. Well, folks, it doesn't just happen to a family that no one knows about or a family that's just on their own. This happens to anyone. It can happen to anyone at any time, including a pastor and his wife in a local community in California. We have with us here in the studio someone who I'm really glad to be here. He's a pastor. He's a gentleman that is a pastor of a church, Calvary Chapel of Murrieta, right?
Yes, Calvary Sunrise, Murrieta.
Calvary Sunrise, Murrieta. Todd Harvey, thank you, Pastor, for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
First, I want to salute you for the work that you're doing for the kingdom. Your church has been there in Murrieta for how long?
23 years.
23 years.
Right.
And in fact, I've guest preached there before.
You have, I think, twice.
Twice.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Well, you had me back a second time. That's
right.
That's a good sign. So,
Yeah.
so but you're doing some wonderful work there with the light of Jesus. But you and your wife have another area of ministry,
Right.
and that was to reach out to a couple of kids, a boy and a girl, that needed help. And tell us the story.
Yeah. Well, my wife, Kelly, and I have been married 26 years now, and about 7 or 8 years ago, it put on my wife's heart to adopt children. I was dragging my feet more than she was, but the Lord got a hold of me, and we adopted our first sibling set in September of 2014, and they've been with us now, for 5.5, 6 years or so, in our home, but adopted in 2014. And after their adoption, the Lord said, okay, we're going to do this again. And my wife was convinced, and I said, Lord, I need a sign. And on the day we got the call from CPS for the second sibling set, the Lord showed me Isaiah 1 and I believe 17 about taking care of the fatherless. So we went over to CPS and got the story about the second sibling set. And right away I knew we should adopt them or take them into our home. So we did that in September of 2015.
Okay, now I want to stop right there and just first salute you for seeking the Lord, being open to being willing to have the fatherless, to be willing to adopt.
Right.
There's so many kids out there in foster care. The statistics are terrible. In fact, one study came out, it said it's better for a child, and this is the government came out with this study, a bigger shock. But the study said that it's better for a child statistically to actually remain in a moderately abusive home than to be put into foster care. Yeah. So these kids need home. They need families. They need commitment and love. And I just salute you for doing that. And I know there's a number of people I know who are really working hard to help further that as a ministry across the country. Yeah. So you stepped forward in faith. You responded in love. What happened then?
Yeah. Well, we after we received disclosure, a few weeks later, we met the kids. They were both in separate homes. It's a sibling set. And we met them and right away knew it was right for us. So we got the little girl into our home right after her second birthday, and the little boy was about 12 weeks old. So our home was the first one they'd ever been in together as brother and sister. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's very healthy too.
Yeah, for them
for
it was great.
siblings.
The first time she really could interact with her little brother, and that whole bond began to form. So we had them in our home as adoptable children. We were told there's no way they're going back to birth parents based on the case. And so our hearts were set on adoption from day one. And so from September of 2015 till the following April of 2016, we were in that adoptive mode, bonding, thinking these will be our kids. And then the judge in April of 2016 went against the Child Protective Service recommendation to not offer services to birth parents based on the history of the case. He went against that and gave services to the parents again. And then at that point, a new worker was put in place to reunify them.
Okay, so this is a radical change.
Yeah.
You have them in foster care.
Right.
And you're getting ready to adopt them. And then a social worker says, yes, they should be. This is good.
Right.
The judge says, no, I think we want to have the kids given back to their parents.
Right.
Now, I'll be honest with you. I believe in parents' rights.
Right.
if you can have restoration with the parents and have the parents get their act together,
Absolutely.
it's generally the best for the children to be with their parents
Right.
and to stay with their parents. But there were some problems with
Right.
these parents
Yeah.
that gave the social worker and you and your wife serious concerns about the children going back with the parents. Without mentioning their names,
Right.
can you sort of give an overview as just some of the issues as to why you were concerned about the children going back to the parents?
Well, the birth mom had a history with social services based on older siblings from another relationship, and so they knew her well. And at this time, the birth dad was in and out of jail. He was involved in gang activity and drugs, and
Oh, no.
for whatever reason, they thought, let's give him another try. And like you said, I'm all for birth parents having their children.
Right.
And that would be the best thing. We actually prayed that they could pull things together and do that, but right away, we knew that wasn't probably going to happen.
Right.
And so when the judge ordered reunification for the birth mom and services, a new social worker was put in place in the spring of 2016, and that's when all our problems really began, because her job, I think, was to get the kids back with the parents, which
Right.
was her mindset, which I understand. But on a couple of occasions, she miscommunicated things, was late, was very unprofessional in her dealing with us. We had multiple allegations of abuse and marks on the children right
Okay.
after a birth visit
Against you.
against us.
Okay, now
Right.
let's talk about that.
Right.
So she, the social worker, had to justify the children not being with you
Right.
anymore as foster care,
Right.
much less being given back to the parents, had made some allegations saying that the kids had marks, bruises. Did they actually have marks and bruises?
Yeah. No, on multiple occasions, a social worker would come out to our home, one time accompanied by 2 police officers.
Yeah.
My daughter and I were leaving at the time. They said, we need
Right.
to go back inside. I said, I get it. We walked in the door, police officers, and our older adopted children are watching this as well. So
Oh,
it's triggering a
very,
lot of
very,
things in them.
very traumatic,
Yeah.
unstable,
Yeah.
probably fears of them being taken away.
So right away, they start to examine the little girl at the time, and the social worker said, there's not a mark on this child. And the police officers kind of roll their eyes and say, can we go now? And she said, yes, I'm sorry. And so she finished her investigation with us, and she said, I'm very sorry, but I just have to do this.
Right.
Protocol.
But that
And
wasn't
I
the
said, "I
first time.
understand."
That wasn't the first time.
That time with the police officers
it-
was probably the third time. We had 5 or 6 allegations made against us, all totally unfounded.
All unfounded and,
Yeah.
and not proven against you. Say, hey,
Nothing,
there's
yeah.
nothing.
There's nothing
Where are these
there.
accusations coming from? This is this social
They're
worker
not
that
supposed to let you know, but we know they always happened after a visit. So probably birth mom and or dad perhaps are saying these people are busy to get them out of there.
Because
Yeah.
they're afraid that the children are going to go with you
Right.
instead of them, and,
Right.
and the children are sort of a pawn here,
Right.
Which is really traumatic and unfortunate.
Right.
So this is taking place back and forth.
Yeah.
The children end up back with the parents, apparently, right?
Well, the children stayed with us from April 2016 and had visits.
Right.
And then in August of 2016 is when Eliana woke up one morning before a birth visit with a tiny little bruise on her ear.
Right.
And we reported it right away with pictures, and we thought
Right.
she had a habit of rolling her ears out of nervousness, or
Right.
she jumped in her bed at night and could
Right.
have bumped it on her dresser.
Right.
And we found out later we didn't have to report these things, but we did out of good faith, and they would use that against us. So that bruise on her ear launched a huge investigation. So in August of 2016, they removed the children from our home, saying injuries continuing to occur in our home. And that led to me filing a grievance hearing with the county. We went through multiple phone calls, meetings. We filed a JV 180 with the court and went to court 5 times. And the short version is, because I know we're limited on time, we
Yes.
went back to court 5 times on behalf of these kids. We had 26 notarized character reference letters, including one from our own doctor who saw Ellie and Mike on a regular basis, saying never once did he ever see
Right.
or suspect any abuse. And when we went to court on April of 2017 for the 5th time, there was a false narrative given to the judge by the social worker representing our family in a way that was not in any way true.
Okay, let me ask you something right here.
Yeah.
Why was that social worker making these false allegations? And I know part of the answer to this
Yeah.
because I've dealt with social workers,
Right.
and a lot of them have agendas,
Yeah.
and a lot of them don't like Christians, much less pastors
Right.
who are preaching the word
Yeah.
that often are a challenge to their own lifestyle.
Right.
and their own agenda. Is that?
Yeah.
Do you think that may be the case here?
While I can't prove that, I deeply suspect it, that this social worker, from
Yeah.
the day we challenged her and she knew we were Christian, didn't like us and had an agenda to get the children out of our home. And nobody from the day that grievance hearing to the court in April, through the county, I've been through multiple conversations and meetings,
Right.
would address that false narrative with us. They said that's an internal matter, and
Right.
I've reached out to many
Right.
groups.
So you
saying,
couldn't. So
yeah.
you couldn't find out. You couldn't find out confirm it, whether the bias, et cetera.
Right.
But it's most apparent because it was nothing legitimate.
Right.
Now I know there are some good social workers out there.
Absolutely.
Doing great work with great heart. I wish there were more.
Right.
But there's also a lot who are really botching things up
Right.
with their own agendas, et cetera. Yeah. You were somewhat vindicated, weren't you, by the state?
Right. The state licensing that gives us our license did their investigation into everything we've talked about, and they said every charge against you was totally unfounded, and the social worker should have been fired for the way she handled our case. But as far as the state of California, they said your license is intact, and we're fine with you as an adoptive home.
Right. You just have the Riverside standing in the
County,
way
right.
of Riverside County of cooperating, allowing you to adopt and to minister and to love. And I want people to understand this, watching this program. This is, folks, this is not isolated.
No, it's not at all.
This is taking place in other places. Some social workers have come right out and said to a church. I know down in the Temecula area,
Right.
they appeared before a church and they said, if you believe that same-sex sexual activity is wrong, a homosexual marriage is wrong, then you're not fit. You can't be foster care parents.
Yeah.
Because if you're a Christian, you believe in the Word of God,
Right.
you're automatically disqualified.
Right.
These are some of those qualified people who understand right and wrong and love and the love of Christ. She had the audacity. This is out of Riverside.
Right.
Now, they since backed off. When we stepped in and reported what had taken place, they backed off on this and said, okay, no, we won't do this. They can qualify. But that heart and that mindset and that attitude is still there. These children, real quick, Pastor,
Yeah.
because we're running out of time.
Right.
What exactly happened to those children? Are they with their original parents, or were they then put somewhere else?
Well, they were removed in August 2016. They were reunified shortly after that with birth parents, and that fell apart, as everybody knew.
Right.
And so the little girl now has been in 9 to 12 placements in 3 years of life, and the little boy in probably 4.
These are different placements, different
Yes,
families,
yeah.
which mentally and emotionally, unquestionably,
two.
is extremely harmful because
Yeah.
it prevents the child from being able
Right.
to learn how to bond.
Attachment disorders and
Major
all kinds
attachment
of things.
disorders. I've talked with people who've had these issues
Right.
before. The consequences of it are horrific, and yet these kids could have been with a stable, loving family like you and your wife.
Could have been. Yeah.
And that is tragic.
Yeah.
It is tragic. And that's the system we have in states across the country, and it's something that cannot be ignored, and that's why I wanted to have you on our show.
Yeah.
Pastor, thank you for the work that you're doing.
Appreciate it.
Continue to fight the good fight for the kingdom, and continue to share that love and that hope with the world around you, and particularly the children that you're able to still to minister to moving forward. But I appreciate your story, and this is hopefully something that people can appreciate themselves and learn from.
Yeah.
And if folks, if you have any issues in the future dealing with social workers threatening to take your kids, please contact us at the Pacific Justice Institute. We give emergency counsel before children are taken to try to prevent these things from taking place. God bless you again, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Brad. Appreciate it.
So my name is Adelmo. I'm 33 years old. I was born and raised in Brazil. Came to America 2 years ago. I've been living here with my wife. Got married 2 years ago. I came to faith in Jesus Christ around 17 years ago. I was living a terrible life in drugs and crime. Praise God, I had people coming and telling me about the faith in Jesus Christ. I understand that when you have something very good, you want to share it with people, especially if it is something that people need. And the gospel is something that people need. November 2015, it was a remarkable date for me. When I was out there preaching, it was in front of a gas station. People didn't like the message and they called the police. The police officer came and I kept asking him, what law have I broken? What crime have I committed? And he didn't have an answer to my question. He just wanted my ID, and I was trying to make sure that I was going to give him my identification as soon as I understood the crime I was committing. I stood my ground, and he stood his ground, and well, he had the handcuff, so he put the handcuff on me. It didn't make me afraid or anything. I was actually willing to be arrested if that's what it takes for me to be able to have my faith proclaimed. Even the Lord Jesus Christ himself was arrested for preaching the word that he preached. So I don't expect people to be behaving or treating me any better than what they did with the Lord. When I was arrested, I didn't have any legal representation. They said I was going to spend 365 days in jail, pay a fine of $1,000, and I was going to be deported back to Brazil without my wife. And I trusted God that we were going to win, and praise God. They never prosecuted it, so they dropped the charges 2 days before the trial.
We at the Pacific Justice Institute are handling more and more cases just like Adamos, where people are being victimized because of intolerance because of their faith. We're committed to defending the fundamental civil rights of individuals, and we're sort of unique in that we work hard across America to make sure that no one is ever left on the side of the road. No case is too small for the Pacific Justice Institute. And folks, if you decide to support the Pacific Justice Institute on a one-time or a monthly basis, we greatly appreciate that. And we have wonderful resources available to show our appreciation for those who want to be a part of our team. And that's at our website. You can get resources like 12 Steps on Protecting Your Children from CPS or from social workers. It's a wonderful resource. It'll help protect your children, your grandchildren from being wrongfully taken by zealous social workers that have an agenda different than what's truly in the best interest of children and protecting children. This happens all the time. This is just one of our valuable resources available on our website, pacificjustice.org, pacificjustice.org. And there's other resources as well. Just go to our website, pacificjustice.org. And while you're there, please consider supporting Pacific Justice Institute on either a one-time or a monthly basis. It is greatly, greatly appreciated. We have with us on the line one of our staff attorneys, Matt McReynolds. Matt, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Brad. Always a pleasure.
Now, Matt, we recently had a major win that we observed from the United States Supreme Court dealing with religious freedom, and in particular dealing with a baker who had a bakery in Colorado, and he was being persecuted because of his Christian faith. Tell us more.
That's right, Brad. And not only were we watching keenly as this unfolded, but Pacific Justice Institute joined one of the amicus briefs that was filed in this case in support of this baker. So we had a role in this, and of course, it was just a huge sigh of relief for all of us who have been counseling, as you and I have been for at least the last 10 years, those in the wedding industry, the bakers, the florists, the photographers, the coordinators, the ministers, who have just been wondering what the future holds for them and whether they're going to be able to continue practicing their beliefs in light of what's happened with same-sex marriage.
Yeah, and I know as far as like churches and pastors, a lot of them specifically have had questions about, should I do marriages anymore? Am I going to be forced to do a marriage with a same-sex couple and then we get sued and lose our church? We at Pacific Justice Institute, I know, have helped them specifically with model bylaws to help protect their church so they don't have to be inhibited in any way of carrying out that aspect of ministry, which is conducting weddings from a godly biblical perspective. Yet there's still people in the private sector, like this baker, that don't have that kind of protection. And this specific baker was sued because he refused to prepare a wedding cake, not just sell a cake, but actually customize a wedding cake for a couple who were the same sex, were going to get married, and they asked him to do the cake, and he said, "No, I can't because of my Christian faith. I cannot carry out this action. I cannot participate in a wedding ceremony that violates my faith." What happened there in the story? What did the couple do?
Well, Brad, it was just amazing how they turned on him. He reported being cursed at before they stormed out. And then they got the authorities involved, and they went to the Colorado Civil Rights Commission and filed an official complaint that ultimately landed that baker, Jack Phillips, in big trouble with the state.
Now, and Jack Phillips, I think it's important to note, he wasn't like hiding his faith all the time. He was very open about his Christian faith. And I can't help but think, speculatively, whether or not he was actually targeted, because we see a lot of Christian targeting and attacking to silence and to punish, to destroy those who are openly practicing the Christian faith and don't go along with an agenda, the LGBT agenda, which is divergent to clearly to the Word of God and the teachings of Christianity. And yet he was attacked for whatever the reasons, whether it was just happenstance or premeditated. What happened with the commission? Did the commission rule in favor of his religious freedom rights, not to have to choose between his faith and being able to have a business in the United States of America? Or did they come down against him?
Well, I think it's fair to say, Brad, they came down pretty hard on Jack Phillips for his faith and observance. And ultimately, there was a silver lining in that, because they came down so hard on him with their comments and their dismissiveness of his faith and his conscience, that's what got the Supreme Court's attention, and that's what ultimately helped the case to turn out in his favor just a few days ago. They were so dismissive of his faith and his practice, his beliefs, that ultimately the silver lining in that was it got the U.S. Supreme Court's attention. And when it reached the Supreme Court very recently, this was one of the big things that the court keyed in on, and one of the big takeaways from this decision. Right.
And it did go to the court system, and then it did go to the United States Supreme Court. And the lower courts had ruled against this baker and his fundamental rights to not have to compromise his faith. And in fact, it was even there was so much language, it was really obvious that there was a real bias against them, bigotry against him because of his Christian faith throughout this whole process. And as you said, at the end of the day, the Supreme Court actually used that against those to show their bigotry and discrimination. So let me ask you, are there any examples specifically that we can talk about that I know they referenced they compared him to the Holocaust? Is that right? As far as the degree of the bigotry and discrimination, it was compared to the Holocaust and World War II. Is that right?
They sure did, Brad. That and slavery was the other big thing that was invoked by some of these commissioners. Say, well, you're using the Bible to justify your discrimination here. We've seen the Bible used to justify other atrocities like those throughout history. And again, this was something the Supreme Court just flatly rejected as being any kind of legitimate reasoning, legitimate debate in this very, very important issue of our times.
And I also understand that they took a look at the fact that this commission had no problem saying okay and approving of another baker owned by LGBT activist individuals, allegedly, that decided to discriminate against a couple of Christians getting married who wanted a wedding cake reflecting their biblical worldview of marriage. They said, oh, that's okay. Yeah, you can discriminate. That's no problem. But we're going to pounce on this Christian baker. And the Supreme Court saw that and said, Also, it's not only open bigotry and hostility, it's open selective and discriminatory application of this state law, and that's unconstitutional. So it was a decisive win in that regard for the baker, but there's still a lot hanging out there, isn't there, moving forward? I mean, a baker in another state with another issue, they theoretically could have a different outcome because this decision was very narrow, correct?
Sure, Brad. And I want to let listeners know there are 7 takeaways that we've identified and put together at Pacific Justice Institute from this decision. We're not going to have time to get to all of them today, but there's great depth in this resource that we've posted up on our website now. Just go to our resources and books and brochures. Check out the 7 takeaways from this decision. We've included a lot of the language from the court opinions themselves, so that people can see for themselves what the Supreme Court was saying and what some of these implications are going to be in greater detail.
Yeah, and Matt, I'm really glad you mentioned that because the media, the news media, they sort of just cover, just the basics, just very thinly, the issues. But what we really did is we went through and dissected it and then broke it down after going through it in a very detailed way, and then broke it down in 7 clear points, takeaways. And some of those takeaways are ones that what people will not have heard about in the media that are very, very significant with regards to their rights, religious freedom, etc. So I strongly encourage you, if you're interested in knowing more about this case and its impact, just go to our website. We're not charging for this. We at Pacific Justice, we never charge for our work. It's one of our distinctives. We don't have a separate law firm on the side that we send people to charge them. We don't require them to join a membership club at Pacific Justice to help them. We do all of our work without charge, and that also includes our resources at our website, pacificjustice.org, pacificjustice.org. So go to our website, take a look at that if you want more information. But the bottom line is these kinds of cases are very important. We know that the Supreme Court is teeter-tottering as we move forward on religious liberty, and it's something that people need to take very, very seriously. Matt, any final takeaways that people should take notice of before we wrap up today?
Yeah, just real briefly, Brad, one of the things that we saw in this opinion that was so encouraging to us was the continued emergence of Justice Gorsuch. His writing, he wrote a terrific concurrence in this case. There's some more on that in the takeaways document. There's some new reassurance of protections for ministers and for churches that we're eager to apply in some of the cases that we have pending right now. So just some great things there. Lots more in the resource we have online. Yeah,
there are some definite gold nuggets that have not been talked about that we at Pacific Justice are very excited about. So I know if you're out there, you have the time, go to our website, pacificjustice.org, and there you can also sign up to get our weekly news update. It's called our Legal Insider. You'll find that really helpful as well. Thank you very much, Matt. Keep up the great work. We really appreciate you. So, folks, there you have it. It's our God-given freedoms we're talking about. Now, let's choose to keep them. I'm Brad Dacus with Pacific Justices. Have a great day.